ECS 210 Final by McIvor. Student ID 200-393-213. Hey there, my name is McIvor, and this video is for my ECS 210 Final and how the class has progressed my teaching pedagogy and philosophy. Before entering this class, I did not know how it would challenge my worldview, but I made the assumption that it would test my prior educational experiences, similar to the previous educational classes that I have enrolled in. For example, ECS 110. Each week had a unique learning experience that would be reflected on and would help create a new conceptual framework for my teaching pedagogy. A main topic that challenged my worldview exponentially was the importance of treaty education within society. I did not realize that education was so skewed in a Eurocentric way. Before reflecting on my own personal educational journey in this class and seeing how few First Nations ideals were ingrained within the teachings I have acquired. Most of the varying curricula within the Saskatchewan education system have outcomes that relate to a First Nations belief system, but I personally received very little knowledge of these outcomes. This hindered my understanding of Canadian society, which was only restored by my reflections within ECS 210. I understand why teachers would rather give lessons from a Eurocentric way, as giving a First Nations perspective would challenge the normative narrative of teaching and may confuse students who are used to receiving an education from a European perspective. However, I believe challenging these norms within the educational community is crucial. The history of Canada is vast, and by focusing on a European perspective, it would create a single story in which students of these classes may infer that European history is more beneficial than a First Nations history. We are all treaty people, which means more than just living on the treaty land. It signifies that the land we live on is only possible because of these treaties. Treaties are a foundational part of Canadian society. They highlight the acceptance of the First Nations people of European settlers, and also how treaties are an eternal binding that will survive as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows, as was stated in Treaty 6. However, many of the promises within the treaties have not been upheld, and therefore teaching about First Nations ideals would help all people living in Canada understand the miscarriages of justice that have been given to a lot of First Nations communities. There are many ramifications from residential schools and the 60 Scoop that continue to affect the First Nations community to this day, and by teaching about why and how this came to be would be an excellent step in the overall healing of these events. I was naive to this information before taking this class, but it really helped develop part of my teaching pedagogy. As we are all treaty people, we as teachers should be teaching a proper education on the matter, even if it is an uncomfortable discussion in the classroom. By avoiding these discussions, it only creates ignorance and furthers a Eurocentric worldview in our society. Secondly, the common sense idea that we talked about very early on in the semester resonated with me abundantly. The world is so vast, and yet I have such a closed mind when it comes to others' cultures and their own education beliefs. What may seem like a common sense to me may be the exact opposite of another's culture. People are all raised differently and have different viewpoints in many aspects of life. Therefore, as a becoming teacher, I have to keep an open mind and not assume an idea as being common sense. If I assume that something is common sense knowledge and it isn't in my classroom, then it will most likely hinder someone's ability to learn. My goal is to be a very knowledgeable teacher, and from a content standpoint, this ECS class helped me understand the plethora of challenges that I will face when becoming a teacher. I still have a lot of growing to do in my teaching pedagogy for me to be able to effectively teach any class, but reflecting on it now has shown me how much The final main idea that shaped my teaching pedagogy is viewing the models of curriculum and relating it to my previous schooling. Prior to this class, I had very little experience with the curriculum and therefore had no idea about the 4 models of curriculum. Looking back on my educational journey within high school, product and curriculum being transmitted were the main models that were used. Both process and more so praxis were underutilized in my personal experience, and I believe these are the ones that should be utilized more so. I think this because in my university classes that utilize these models, they tend to help me excel with the knowledge being grasped. Our lectures were filled with reflective ideas that consisted of concepts that challenged my worldview, and it was these thought-provoking ideas that inspired me. For me being a third-year student, I have very little knowledge on how to actually teach a class. However, ECS 210 helps integrate these models of curriculum into my teaching pedagogy. Understanding the different styles of teaching is essential, and preceding this class I had no idea that there were even differences in the way people were teaching from a conceptual framework. I realized that praxis is an excellent way in involving the students in their own learning, which is why when I begin my own career as a teacher, I plan to mostly utilize that model as well as process. At the end of the day, I realized that every curriculum needs to have all aspects of the four models though, because if they didn't, say, for example, if there was no product, what would be the end goal of the class? In conclusion, I've learned a lot of valuable information that not only challenged my worldview, but also shaped my always changing teaching pedagogy. The main ideas of treaty education, common sense, and the four models of curriculum were the main ways that this class has resonated with me. I look forward to utilizing what I have learned for many years to come.